Let's get talking now, and I'm being joined by a partner, and he's also the Director of Tax Reporting and Strategy. He's with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Kenneth Erikume. Good afternoon, Mr. Erikume. It's good to see you.
Good afternoon, Tolu. Thanks for inviting me and looking forward to our chat.
As usual, I think we'll start this way. I don't know if you were expecting another shift, but at the end of the day, we saw a 50% hike in the rates. That's on one side. But the CBN governor actually agreed to the fact that the fiscal side is now doing a lot to consolidate what they are doing on the monetary side. How would you place all of this? Or let me ask you, how does it come to you? Regarding the figures and, of course, acknowledging the fact that the fiscal side is now doing what the monetary side needs to succeed.
All right. Thank you very much, Tolu, for that question. So how it comes to me is that it's not a shock that the rates were increased by 50 basis points, which is 0.5. Actually, expectations were that the central bank would most likely not increase the rates for several reasons. As you can imagine, further to the tightening of the monetary policy interventions by the central bank, there has been an impact in the Nigerian economy. So in Q1 2024, there was a deceleration in GDP growth, and rightly so, because the expectation is that a lot of industries and businesses rely on credit. And when you have interest rates going in the high direction, it will be difficult for people to take more loans. And even in respect of things like housing, mortgage interest would obviously go up with the high interest rates. So that also makes it difficult for people to acquire and develop property, and so on and so forth. And that's just looking at, the direct impact. So there was an expectation that the central bank would not be in a hurry to significantly increase the interest rates. And when you look at comparables from other jurisdictions across Africa, you look at South Africa, you look at Ghana, who has faced significant inflation, you look at Egypt, they've all held their rates steady. And the phrase higher for longer, even without increasing, is something that we pretty much expect from an economic perspective. So overall, we didn't expect an increase, but 50 basis points, on balance is not unexpected, because it's not a significant increase. Now, in terms of coordination and certain things the government is looking at to ensure that we are not just dealing with things from a monetary policy perspective, but we are also looking at the fiscal policy. Obviously, two big factors in terms of the inflation numbers. Number one is food, and the second one is obviously energy. And we're pretty much coming into the harvest season, where some of the interventions that government has made in that space will begin to crystallize, which will then, provide that stability around, the inflation rate and ultimately the interest rate. But we obviously need to see more in the energy and transportation space. And the CBN governor rightly alluded to the fact that the cost of transporting food across the nation is significantly impacted. So interventions in those areas would be welcome, and it's important that they come through very quickly. And one of the important sectors for me that needs to be considered is the small and medium enterprises, because the energy inflation is impacting and hitting them heavily So a lot of intervention needs to happen in that space, whether it be incentives, whether it be supplementation with renewables, like solar, and so on. Government needs to look at that space. The much anticipated and discussed, but without much traction, is the compressed natural gas and the ability of, um, you know, cars to run on CNG, based on conversion that the government would look at. So for me, I think that that is crucial because when you look at some of the issues around fuel scarcity, in the economy at the moment, something needs to be done and done urgently. So number one, can we accelerate the investment into CNG, and alternative sources of power? And sometimes we avoid talking about this, or I think we forget. Many years ago, there was this interest in the fact that, a lot of, and if you remember the economic intervention and growth plan, I think that was, run by the previous administration. There was an expectation that when the Dangote refinery comes on stream, that a lot of the pressures around our exchange rate and the demand for the liquidity of FX would be eased. And the CBN governor alluded to that one of the things we need to deal with is the importation of petroleum products. So for me, strategically, that issue, and interestingly, it has become a current issue of conversation at the moment, needs to be put on the table from a strategic point of view, because it deals with the arbitrage of moving our crude to foreign refineries, and then importing refined products, again. Apart from that, we also need to look at the issue of ramping up our production of crude, because at the end of the day, that is still our foremost generator of foreign currency income. Yeah. So all of these things need to come together, and government needs to give significant relief for the small, medium enterprises. Otherwise, this could easily escalate, and then we have a recession and massive deceleration in our GDP growth.
I think it's really interesting that we are identifying the issues and also, of course, trying to prefer solutions or giving advice to government on what to do to address this ugly trend. Great stuff there from you, Mr. Erikume. But let me take you on the issue of food. Everyone wants to talk about food. Everyone wants to eat. And of course, we know what food inflation is at this time. And he identified support by government, particularly with regards to the 150-day duty-free window for food commodities and all of that. The CBN governor commended that. That's on one side. But on the other side, he also identified the issue of insecurity. So how do we put this side by side and address the challenge of food security? Yes, we are getting to the harvest season, but something that is sustainable.
Yeah, 100%. So sustainability is the key word in the question, because, the removal of the import duty on imported food is only a short-term measure. Because if we do not have domestic security, then all what you're simply doing is you would obviously be incentivizing, foreign value addition, and then you'd import those goods into your country. So I'm not an advocate of protectionism. So I wouldn't say that it's a wrong measure, because, when there's an emergency, you have to do what is most crucial for Nigerians. And, like some of my friends used to say, one of the most important roles of government is to secure the lives of citizens and cater for their welfare. So government needs to do what it needs to do. So removal of the import duty on certain commodities, food commodities, I think it's a step in the right direction. But over and above that, we need to deal with the issue of domestic food security. And you rightly identified the issue. And the funny thing is that this thing is a vicious cycle. If there is deceleration, if there's deceleration in the economy, it will lead to a decline in our productivity. And that cycle turns around because it then leads to security issues and escalation of security issues, whether they be physical security or cyber security. So one of the things you would have noticed with escalation or you know, the challenges in the economy is that security issues have also escalated because then people become a bit more desperate. So government therefore needs to deal with the issue around security head on and ensure that farmers can actually go to their farms without any challenge. We've already catered for some of that in the budget, both from a domestic, a defense perspective and internal security perspective and funding of the police and things like that. So we need to strengthen all that infrastructure to ensure that domestic production goes up. In addition to that, what are the incentives being targeted at our farmers and the agri sector? They have to be very, very much coordinated and strategic, and we need to essentially identify the critical areas that we want to play. The issue of open grazing continues to be a matter that the government needs to, address. So when you look at all the African countries that have made some headway in terms of livestock, one of the things you would discover is that farms and formal and well-structured farms is something that has been embraced and incentivized by the government. So we also need to look at that in terms of driving the fiscal strategy around food security. In the long term, this is the only solution. But in the short term, we need to survive. So removal of the import duties, not wrong, but not the best, because what you're essentially doing is you are obviously incentivizing foreign production as compared to your domestic production.
Mr. Erikume, before I let you go, the concerns of manufacturers, immediately this has happened, we've heard from the rail sector. And of course, their complaints almost remain the same, constrained to getting capital to run their businesses. This will stifle business in a way they won't be competitive. We can go on and on. Production costs will be on the high side. How do you think how will the economy manage this moving forward?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Fiscal incentives would have been nice for the manufacturing sector. At the moment, what we have is export-focused incentives. So different policies, whether now or previously, have sort of tried to incentivize, provide tax incentives, rebates through the export expansion grant, and so on and so forth. So, and which makes sense because you're trying to diversify the economy so that we're not just reliant on crude in terms of our foreign currency earnings. But that's on the one hand. There's a lot of manufacturing that are domestic focused. And these guys are growing significantly from the pressure on the one side, the economic headwinds, and then the monetary policy as well has had an impact. So from a two-dimension perspective, so the significant devaluation means that a lot of these manufacturing companies are sitting with exchange losses, especially where they import their raw materials or have foreign currency liabilities. They, from an accounting perspective, were hit significantly by devaluation. So they are contending with that. So what can we do from a fiscal policy measure to deal with that issue? And there are things we can do. The second impact that they've had is, the double whammy of inflation and interest rates. So with inflation, it means that there is cost pressure on them, which is eating into their margins. However, on the output side, because of slow growth and the erosion of the purchasing power of Nigerians, they are struggling to pass on some of those costs to the final consumer. And therefore, it becomes quite difficult. They employ several strategies. Some of them have done sachetization, but how much sachetization can you do? So, on that output side, there is still that problem. And then you have the interest rates, which is obviously killing them. So, when you look at all of these three things, and let's start with the exchange, with the devaluation, exchange losses. Now, one of the things from a tax perspective that happens is that you could make an accounting loss because of devaluation, but you still pay income tax because from a tax perspective, unrealized exchange losses are not deductible. On the basis that you haven't settled those liabilities, they are unrealized. So government needs to think of a way to accelerate the deduction of those losses for them to be able to benefit from it and save on tax. On the interest rate side, there has to be special interventions. And I know that the credit guarantees, the entity set up for credit guarantees like, infrastructure credit guarantee and impact credit, which is a subsidiary of the development bank, can play a role in that space. As long as they can guarantee the security of the payback of the principal, the central bank can look at that, or the government generally, and see how they can intervene to provide succor and some relief over those interest rates. Then from the output side, obviously government has a role to play in terms of channeling and empowering the people. And I think that one of the areas they can do is to have structured, cooperatives and have structured credit entities that can stimulate the small and medium enterprises. You can have the added benefit of formalizing the so-called informal sector, so that once we are out of this, very rough terrain, a lot of those entities and individuals become tax-paying entities. So it is like an investment the government needs to make now, so that in future there would be benefits that would accrue to the government. So overall, I think that there are things that the government can do, but like I always say, it is around implementation. But I have great hope in the Presidential Economic Coordination Council that, they are going to be looking at harmonizing some of these strategies and making it have fruitful results in the economy.
Brilliant conversation. As usual, interesting chart. Mr. Kenneth Erikume, he is partner, director, tax reporting and strategy, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Do enjoy the rest of your day and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tolu. Always a pleasure.